I still remember that moment vividly, as if it happened just seconds ago. The clock on my desk showed 10:47 p.m., the laptop screen casting a dim blue glow, financial figures dancing before my eyes. The apartment in Wichita was quiet, save for the patter of rain against the window. I, Benjamin Harris, 32 years old, was hunched over finishing a quarterly financial report for Langford Foods Corporation. The work was tedious, but it was how I kept everything under control. My life, my family, my future. I always believed that as long as I worked hard, everything would be fine. But that night I realized you can't always control fate. The phone's vibration startled me. An unknown number. I frowned, my finger hovering over the screen. Who would call at this hour? Clara, my wife, had gone to bed 2 hours earlier, and I didn't want to wake her over a wrong number. But something in my gut told me this wasn't right. I swiped the screen and held the phone to my ear. "Hello, this is Benjamin Harris." The voice on the other end was dry, carrying the chill of a rainy night. "Mr. Harris, this is Lieutenant Davis from the Reno County Sheriff's Office. Your father, Mr. Walter Harris, was involved in a serious car accident on County Road 8 near his farm. He's being taken to Hutchinson Hospital. You should come immediately." My heart stopped. My mind went blank, the sound of rain outside roaring in my ears. "Accident? How serious?" I heard my voice tremble, weak like a child's. "Very serious, sir. I don't have specific details, but the doctors will explain more when you arrive. I'm sorry to deliver this news." I hung up without even thanking him. My hands shook, the phone nearly slipping to the floor. My father, the 63-year-old man, tough as steel, living alone on a farm over 60 miles away, had been in an accident. My father, who always taught me that the most valuable thing a man can leave his child isn't money but a way of life. My father, who, after my mother's death from cancer, chose to bury himself in the wheat fields, as if the land could soothe his grief. And now he was lying somewhere, teetering on the edge of life and death. I shot to my feet, the swivel chair squeaking behind me. My eyes darted to the bedroom where Clara slept. She lay on her side, her blonde hair spilling across the pillow, her breathing steady. I didn't want to wake her. Clara hated surprises, especially at night. I grabbed my coat, car keys, and an umbrella. The apartment suddenly felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and plunged into the rain. The Kansas rain that night wasn't gentle. It was fierce, lashing my face like a punishment. I slid into the old Ford, started the engine, and sped off. The streets of Wichita blurred in the rain, traffic lights smearing into streaks of color. I didn't think much, only that I had to get to Hutchinson, to my father. The 60-mile drive had never felt so long. Rain pounded the windshield, the wipers working overtime but barely clearing the view. Inside the car, there was only the sound of rain and my racing heartbeat. Images of my father flooded my mind, the wiry man with silver hair, hands rough from working the fields. He never complained, not when Mom passed, not when I left the farm to build a life in the city. He only said, "Ben, live so you have no regrets. That's all I want." Hutchinson Hospital loomed through the rain, its cold white neon lights cutting through the darkness. I parked and ran into the main lobby. The smell of antiseptic hit me, the harsh white light making me squint. A nurse behind the reception desk looked at me, her eyes a mix of pity and familiarity, as if she'd seen too many people like me, those arriving with fragile hope. "I'm Benjamin Harris. My father, Walter Harris, was just brought in from a car accident," I said, my voice rushed. She nodded, checked her computer screen, and led me down a long corridor. My shoes echoed on the tile floor, mingling with the persistent patter of rain outside. My heart pounded harder, as if it might burst from my chest. The nurse stopped at a glass door. "Wait here, the doctor will meet you shortly." I nodded, but my eyes were already fixed on the emergency room through the glass. My father lay there on a hospital bed, surrounded by machines and wires. A breathing tube was attached to his mouth, his chest rising and falling faintly. His face was pale, bruised, his eyes closed. I had never seen him so frail. The man who once hoisted me onto his shoulders as a child, who taught me how to hold a hoe and plant seeds. now looked as if a gust of wind could carry him away. "Are you Benjamin Harris?" A low voice pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to face a middle-aged man in a white coat, his face stern. "I'm Dr. Carter." "Yes, I'm Benjamin." "My father? How is he?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but it trembled. Dr. Carter sighed, his eyes heavy. "I won't sugarcoat it. Your father has a severe traumatic brain injury. He was brought in unconscious and is in a coma. We've done everything to stabilize him, but his chances of survival are very low. You should prepare yourself." His words hit like a punch to the gut. I stood frozen, my heart racing, my legs numb. I asked again, my voice choking in my throat. "You mean there's almost no hope?" "We'll continue monitoring and treating him," Dr. Carter said, placing a hand on my shoulder in a gesture of comfort. "But with injuries like these, full recovery is highly unlikely. You should stay here. If anything changes, we'll let you know immediately." I nodded, my mind blank. I didn't know what to do, what to say. I just stood there, staring through the glass at my father, the man who had been my entire world, now fighting death. The white lights in the emergency room stung my eyes, but I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because I feared that if I let the tears fall, I wouldn't be able to stop. The rain kept falling outside, as if the sky were crying for me. I glanced at the clock. Nearly 1 a.m. Just 2 hours ago, I was sitting in my warm apartment thinking my life was on track. Now I was here in a cold hospital, facing the reality that my father might be gone forever. I leaned my head against the wall, closing my eyes. An image of my father appeared, standing in the wheat fields, his kind smile, his warm voice. "Ben lives so you have no regrets." I opened my eyes, looking through the glass once more. He lay there, motionless. But I knew even with just a 1% chance I wouldn't give up. Never. I pulled out my phone and sent a short text to Clara. "Dad was in an accident. I'm at Hutchinson Hospital. Can you come in the morning?" Then I pocketed the phone, stood, and stepped closer to the glass. I placed my hand on it, as if I could touch him, as if I could give him my strength. "Hold on, Dad," I whispered. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." That night I knew everything had changed. The life I thought I understood, work, family, future, was now a hazy fog, but I also knew one thing. I would fight for my father, no matter the cost. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the hospital window, weak and pale. I had dozed off for a few hours on a plastic chair, my neck stiff, my mind foggy. I checked my phone, no messages from Clara. I sighed, stood up and stretched, trying to shake off the heaviness in my chest. I turned and there she was, Clara, walking into the hospital lobby looking as if she'd just stepped out of an important meeting. Clara Langford, my wife, 29 years old, was always a picture of perfection. She worked in the marketing department of Langford Foods Corporation, her family's company, and prided herself on keeping everything under control. Clara grew up in luxury, the only daughter of Charles and Evelyn Langford, who ran Kansas's largest food empire. To her, life was a series of goals to conquer: reputation, career, and bank account figures. I loved her truly, but sometimes I wondered if she could ever understand what I valued, things that couldn't be measured in dollars. "Ben," Clara called, her voice echoing in the quiet space, drawing the glance of a nearby nurse. She strode toward me, her heels clicking like a drumbeat. "Why didn't you call me right away?" "You texted me in the middle of the night. I only saw it when I woke up this morning. What's going on?" I stood, forcing a smile. "My dad, he was in a car accident last night. His car crashed on County Road 8 near the farm. He's in the ER. The doctor says it's very serious." Clara frowned, her blue eyes scanning me, then shifting to the glass door of the emergency room. I waited for a hand to hold, a hug, or at least a question about my father. But she just crossed her arms, her voice dropping into the practical tone I knew so well. "How serious? I mean, will he pull through? And what about hospital bills? Does this place take insurance, or are we covering everything ourselves?" Her words hit me like a bucket of cold water. My chest tightened, as if someone had squeezed my heart. "Clara," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "my dad's in a coma. The doctor says he has a severe brain injury. The prognosis isn't good. But I'm not thinking about bills right now. I just want him to live." She looked at me, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "Ben, I know you're worried about your dad, but we have to be realistic. Treatment like this is expensive, and if he doesn't make it, then what? Are you going to pour all our savings into this?" I opened my mouth but didn't know how to respond. Clara wasn't wrong. She always viewed things through a financial lens, and I was used to that. But today her words hurt more than I expected. I wanted to scream, to ask why she couldn't just be here with me for my father. But I stayed silent, clenching my fists in my coat pockets. "Let's wait for the doctor's update," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'll talk to them." Clara nodded, but I could tell she wasn't satisfied. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through something, as if the hospital was just a temporary stop before she returned to her busy life. I turned away, focusing on the glass door where my father lay motionless. A while later, Dr. Carter appeared, still in his white coat, his expression stern. "Mr. Harris, Mrs. Harris," he said, nodding to both of us. "Please come to a private room. We need to discuss your father's condition." We followed him to a small room with a wooden table and a few chairs. The fluorescent light made the space feel colder. I sat down, Clara beside me, but the distance between us felt wider than ever. Dr. Carter opened a file, his voice calm and clear. "I'll be straightforward. Mr. Walter's condition is critical. His traumatic brain injury is among the most severe. He's on a ventilator, but his chances of survival are only about 10%. If he makes it through this phase, treatment and recovery will be long, and I must warn you, the costs will be substantial." My blood rushed to my head, but I tried to stay calm. "So, there's still a chance, right? Even if it's just 10%, he could wake up?" Dr. Carter nodded slowly. "There's a chance, but it's slim. We'll do everything we can, but you need to understand this is a long and uncertain journey." Before I could say more, Clara spoke, her voice sharp and cold. "Doctor, can you clarify the costs? I mean, if treatment drags on, how much are we looking at? And if he doesn't wake up, what then? Are we just supposed to keep paying for an uncertain outcome?" I whipped around to face her, my heart constricting. "Clara!" I nearly shouted, but lowered my voice, trying to suppress my anger. "My dad is lying there, and all you can think about is money? He's my father. I'll do whatever it takes to save him, no matter the cost." Clara frowned, her eyes cold. "Ben, don't be so emotional. I'm just being realistic. We're not as wealthy as my parents. You want to drain our savings, then what? How will we live? Do you want us both buried in debt over a slim hope?" The air in the room grew thick. Dr. Carter looked at us, his eyes filled with sympathy. "I'll give you two some time to discuss," he said, standing and leaving the room. The door closed, leaving Clara and me in stifling silence. "Clara," I said, my voice trembling, "I know you're worried about our future. But this is my dad. He raised me, sacrificed his whole life for me. I can't abandon him just because of money." Clara crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe, her expression unwavering. "Ben, I'm not telling you to abandon your dad," she said, her voice even and cold. "But you need to face reality. What if he doesn't wake up? Are you going to sit here forever watching time, money, and our future slip away?" I wanted to say something, to scream that she didn't understand, that my father was a person, not a burden. But I was speechless. Everything in me felt drained, too exhausted to argue. I shook my head silently and stood. "I need some air," I said, my voice hoarse. "You can go home. I'll stay here." Clara looked at me, her lips pursed. "Fine," she said, grabbing her purse. "But Ben, you need to think carefully. Don't let emotions ruin everything." She turned, her heels clicking as they faded down the hallway. I leaned my head against the wall, closing my eyes. The steady beep of machines in the ER echoed like a second heartbeat. I didn't know what the future held. Didn't know if I had the strength to keep going. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't abandon my father. No matter what Clara thought, no matter if the world turned its back, I would stay here for him. That morning, as I sat in the hospital hallway clutching a cold cup of coffee, I heard the familiar click of Clara's heels. But this time, she wasn't alone. I looked up and saw Charles and Evelyn Langford, Clara's parents, walking in with her. Charles Langford, 62, was the embodiment of power and pragmatism. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his sharp eyes glinted with authority. He ran Langford Foods like a seasoned businessman, always seeing opportunity where others saw risk. Evelyn, 58, the company's head of public relations, was more subtle but no less formidable. She had a knack for controlling others with her words, always guarding the family's reputation at all costs. Their presence unnerved me like another storm was brewing. "Ben," Charles said, his voice deep and commanding, as if he were in a boardroom rather than a hospital hallway. "We need to talk." I stood, trying to stay calm despite my racing heart. "Thank you for coming to see my father," I said, though I knew that wasn't why they were here. Evelyn smiled, a polite but cold smile. "Benjamin, we're very sorry about your father's situation, but we're here today to have a clear conversation. Some things need to be addressed." I nodded and led them to a small room nearby, where Dr. Carter had spoken to Clara and me before. Clara trailed behind, her eyes avoiding mine as if she knew what was coming. We sat down, the air thick with tension like the calm before a battle. Charles got straight to the point, no sugarcoating. "Ben, I understand you're worried about your father, but we need to be realistic. What did the doctor say? His condition hasn't improved, has it? You've been here a week and nothing's changed. Continuing treatment isn't just pointless, it's expensive. Our family, you, Clara, can't keep shouldering these costs indefinitely." His words hit me like a blow to the chest. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Charles, I know the costs aren't small, but he's my father. He's still alive, still has a chance. I can't give up on him." Charles frowned, his eyes like bullets. "Ben, you're being emotional. I'm not saying you should give up right now, but you need to know when to let go. If he doesn't wake up, what then? Drain your savings? Sell your house? How will you and Clara live? Do you think your father would want you to sacrifice your future for him?" My blood surged. "My father would never want me to abandon him," I said, my voice louder than intended. "He taught me that family is everything. I'll do whatever it takes to save him, no matter the cost." Evelyn interjected, her voice soft but sharp like a velvet-wrapped blade. "Benjamin, we don't doubt your devotion, but you need to think about Clara, about your future together. You can't stay here forever, neglecting your job, your wife. Face reality. Sometimes letting go is the best way to love." I looked at Clara, hoping she'd say something, anything, to defend me, to defend my father. But she just sat there, eyes down, lips pressed tight. Her silence said it all. She agreed with her parents. It hurt more than any words could. "I won't sign any papers to take him off life support," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I won't give up on him. If you think I'm weak, so be it, but I know my father will keep fighting." Charles sighed, his eyes full of disappointment. "Ben, you're making this harder than it needs to be. You're not just hurting yourself. You're dragging Clara into this. You need to grow up." His words were a final blow to my dwindling faith. My throat tightened, but I refused to break down in front of them. "Thank you for coming," I said, standing. "But I've made my decision. I'll stay here with my father." Evelyn looked at me, her polite smile gone. "You're making things difficult for yourself, Benjamin. Think carefully." Then she stood, pulling Clara along. Clara glanced at me one last time, her eyes a mix of guilt and frustration, but she said nothing. The sound of her and her mother's heels echoed, fading down the hallway. I sat down, feeling like the world had crumbled beneath me. Clara's family, people I once thought were my support, now saw me as weak, an emotional fool who couldn't think straight. They didn't understand. They didn't see my father the way I did, the man who'd sacrificed his life to keep the farm, to raise me, to teach me that integrity and family love were worth more than anything. That night, I went to the intensive care unit where they allowed me to sit by my father for a few hours. I held his cold, motionless hand. The machines beeped steadily, a reminder that he was still here. "Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I promise I won't abandon you. Even if the world turns its back, I'll stay here." After the conversation with Clara's family, I knew I couldn't go on living as before. My job at Langford Foods Corporation, with its endless financial reports and meetings, suddenly felt meaningless while my father lay on the line between life and death. I called my direct supervisor, a middle-aged man who always scrutinized me with a critical eye. "I need to take a leave of absence," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "My father's in critical condition. I can't focus on work right now." He sighed over the phone, his tone cold. "Ben, you know the company's in a critical phase. If you take leave, I can't guarantee your position will be here when you return." I paused, feeling like I'd been slapped. But then I replied, "I understand, but I have to do this." I hung up before he could say more. It was the first time I put family above career, and the first time I felt free, even if just for a moment. I moved to Hutchinson, renting a tiny room near the hospital. It was barely big enough for a single bed, an old table, and a worn armchair. Each morning I woke at dawn, brewed cheap coffee, and walked to the hospital. Each night I returned in the dark, my body exhausted but my mind still racing with thoughts of my father. His condition didn't improve. Dr. Carter, with sympathetic eyes, told me during an update, "We're doing everything we can, but his brain injury is severe. If he pulls through, he'll need long-term treatment and rehabilitation. You need to prepare for a long journey." His words felt like a verdict. I nodded, but inside a storm raged. How long? How much money? I had no answers, but I knew I couldn't stop. I started dipping into our savings, the money Clara and I had saved for years for the future she always talked about. The funds drained like water, going to hospital bills, medications, and endless incidental costs. When the savings ran low, I began selling valuables. The flat-screen TV from our Wichita apartment, my beloved college collection of vintage watches, even my mother's wedding ring, all gone. Each time I signed a sales receipt, I felt a piece of myself being carved away. But I told myself, as long as Dad's alive, it's worth it. But the money still wasn't enough. One morning, as another massive hospital bill piled up, I sat in my small room, hands trembling, holding a stack of papers. Among them was the deed to my father's farm, the land he'd spent his life preserving after my mother's death. I knew he cherished it as much as his own life, but I had no choice. With a heavy heart, I took the deed to the bank and mortgaged it for a large loan. The bank teller looked at me, her eyes a mix of pity and detachment. "Are you sure, Mr. Harris? If you can't repay, you'll lose the farm." I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sure." I returned to the hospital with the loan money, but guilt weighed on my chest like a stone. I had betrayed my father, betrayed the land he loved. But if I hadn't, I would lose him forever. Friends and colleagues helped at first. Some sent money, others brought food to the hospital, patted my shoulder and said, "Hang in there, Ben. It'll be okay." But as I borrowed more, as I couldn't repay on time, the encouragement faded. My calls went unanswered, my texts ignored. A close college friend who once swore he'd always have my back texted back coldly, "Ben, I really want to help, but I have a family too. You're on your own." I read the message, sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, feeling the world shrink to just me and my father. Clara, meanwhile, all but vanished from my life. She stayed in Wichita, citing work at Langford Foods. Her messages dwindled, reduced to cursory questions. "How's your dad?" Or "Are you okay?" I replied briefly. But whenever I mentioned costs or my father's condition, she went silent or changed the subject. One time I called her, my voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Clara, I need you. Just once, can you come here? I'm falling apart." She sighed over the phone, her voice icy. "Ben, I'm swamped with work. You know the company's gearing up for a new campaign. I can't just leave." I hung up without another word. I didn't want to hear more excuses. I carried the burden alone. Each day I sat by my father, wiping his face, checking the machines, signing insurance forms, and researching new medications the doctors suggested. I learned to read medical reports, to negotiate with insurance agents, to fight for every covered dollar. Some nights I sat in the ICU looking at him and wondering if he knew I was there. "Dad," I whispered, gripping his hand tightly. "I'm trying. I won't give up." One afternoon, as I sat in the hospital hallway, my phone buzzed. It was Clara. I hesitated but answered. "Ben," she said, her voice colder than ever. "We need to talk. About the money. You've drained our savings, haven't you? And now you've mortgaged the farm? Did you even think about me, Ben? Did you think about our future?" I gripped the phone, feeling my heart constrict. "Clara," I said, my voice trembling with anger and exhaustion. "I'm trying to save my dad. Do you understand? My dad, the only person who's never turned his back on me." "What do you want me to do? Abandon him to save the future you keep talking about?" She was silent for a moment, then replied, "Ben, you're destroying yourself. And I can't stand by and watch. If you don't stop, I don't know if we can keep going like this." Her words landed like a punch to the chest, leaving me breathless, more than pained. I didn't respond. I hung up, tossing the phone onto the chair. I didn't want to hear more. Not about money, not about the future, not about anything but my father. That night I sat by my father's side, the dim ICU lights casting shadows on his pale, motionless face. I held his hand, feeling the faint warmth still lingering. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I mortgaged the farm. I know you loved it. But I can't lose you. I can't." I bowed my head, pressing my forehead to his hand, letting the pain consume me. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. But I remained resolute. I wouldn't abandon my father, no matter the cost. For him, I would fight to my last breath. But I never expected that this battle would push me to the brink of exhaustion, where every hope felt like faint glimmers, flickering briefly before fading away. 3 months had passed since my father was admitted to the hospital, but time had lost all meaning to me. Each day was an endless loop, the steady beeping of machines, the cold white neon lights of the ICU, and the image of my father lying motionless, like a still painting amid the storm of my life. Dr. Carter provided regular updates, but his words never changed. "No significant progress. We're still monitoring, but you need to prepare for the possibility of long-term care." Each time I heard those words, my heart constricted, as if someone were squeezing the last shred of hope out of me. The cost of treatment piled up like a mountain, weighing heavily on my shoulders. Our savings were long gone. Every valuable item had been sold. The loan from mortgaging my father's farm, the land he cherished more than anything, was nearly depleted. The bank began sending notices, cold white letters with bold red numbers like silent threats. Each time I opened one, I felt smaller, like a weary traveler lost in a desert, unsure of where the end lay. After countless sleepless nights, when sleep became a luxury, I made a decision I had tried to avoid for so long. I would ask Clara's parents for help. I had no other choice. The money was gone, the debts were mounting, and I couldn't carry the burden alone anymore. I clung to a faint hope that Charles and Evelyn would understand, that they would extend a hand, not for me, but for Clara, for the family we had built. I drove back to Wichita my first time in weeks. Our apartment was unchanged, but it no longer felt like home. Clara was there, sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, surprised. "Ben?" When did you get back? Why didn't you tell me? I need to see your parents, I said, my voice hoarse. I need to talk to them. Clara frowned but didn't ask more. She called her parents, and an hour later I stood before the massive wooden door of the Langford mansion. Charles and Evelyn greeted me in their lavish living room, where expensive paintings hung on the walls and lights sparkled from a crystal chandelier. But the atmosphere was colder than the hospital. Ben, Charles said, seated in an armchair, his hands clasped. What brings you here? I thought we made things clear last time. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I know you don't agree with me continuing Dad's treatment, but I'm out of options. The money's gone, the bank's calling in debts. I'm only asking for a little help, a temporary loan or even just advice. I can't lose my father. Charles looked at me, his eyes icy. Then he laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Ben, have you learned nothing? We told you from the start, prolonging treatment is pointless. You didn't listen, stubbornly holding on, and now what? You've lost everything. Your money, your home, Clara's future. You think we'll throw money at a hopeless cause? His words hit like a punch to the face. My blood surged, but I tried to stay calm. I'm not asking for money to waste, I said, my voice trembling. I'm trying to save my father. He's family. Don't you understand? Evelyn stepped in, her voice soft but emotionless. Benjamin, we understand you love your father, but you need to face reality. If you'd listened to us from the start and let him go, things wouldn't have come to this. You're destroying yourself and dragging Clara down with you. Have you thought about her? I looked at Clara standing in the corner, her eyes avoiding mine. Clara, I said, my voice almost pleading, say something. You're my wife. Can't you stand by me just this once? She pursed her lips, then finally spoke, her voice cold. Ben, I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. I don't want us to lose everything just because you can't let go. I froze. My heart shattered like glass crashing to the floor. The Langfords, people I once saw as my support, stood before me, judging me like a failure. I stood, my legs trembling. Thank you for your time, I said, my voice dry. I'll figure it out myself. As I turned to leave, Charles called after me. Ben, you should know. Langford Foods has replaced you. You're officially fired. We can't keep an employee who doesn't work. His words snuffed out my last spark of hope. I paused, gripping the doorknob, but didn't look back. I didn't want them to see my eyes welling up. I understand, I said, then walked out, leaving behind the opulent room and its coldness. I drove back to Hutchinson in silence, my mind blank. My job, the last thing I clung to, was gone. My dignity, my self-respect, all crushed. I had nothing left but my father and the promise I made at his bedside. But even that promise wavered as I wondered how I could go on. That night I returned to the hospital and entered the ICU. My father lay there, still, his hand cold as I held it. I sat down and tears fell. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered. I've lost everything. My job, the money, even Clara. But I won't lose you. I promise. That promise was the only thing keeping me from collapsing. But after the shock of being fired from Langford Foods, I felt like a ship adrift in an endless ocean without a compass or a shore. The money was gone, my job was lost, and Clara, my wife, whom I once thought would be my rock, was now just a distant shadow. Faith, the flame that had warmed me through the darkest days, was now reduced to dying embers. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going, but every time I looked at my father's pale face through the ICU glass, I told myself, as long as he's breathing, I can't stop. One early autumn morning, as weak sunlight filtered through the hospital window, I sat in the hallway, clutching a cold cup of coffee. My eyes were ringed with dark circles, my body so weary that each step felt like dragging a lead weight. I stared out the window where golden leaves were beginning to fall, wondering if there was anything left to hope for. Then a familiar voice, soft but strong enough to pull me from my dark thoughts, broke through. Ben? "Benjamin Harris, is that you?" I looked up and there stood Emily Carter, my high school girlfriend whom I hadn't seen in over a decade. She stood there, her brown hair tied up, her bright eyes full of life, but still carrying the gentle warmth I remembered. She wore a thin wool coat, holding a camera and a notebook, the tools of a journalist. I blinked, suddenly aware of how terrible I must look. "Emily," I said, my voice hoarse, "is that really you?" She smiled, but her smile faded as she took a closer look at me. "My God, Ben, are you okay? You look like you've been through a storm." I gave a weak laugh, trying to hide my embarrassment. "Maybe a storm's exactly what it is." "What are you doing here?" "I'm writing a story for the Wichita Tribune," she said, sitting in the chair beside me, "about the people working in this hospital." "But what about you? Why are you here looking like this?" I hesitated, unsure whether to open up, but Emily's eyes, sincere, non-judgmental, made me feel safe the way she had when we were naive teenagers. I told her everything, the accident, the draining months in the hospital, losing my job, losing money, and Clara's growing distance. I held nothing back, as if speaking could lighten the weight crushing my chest. By the time I finished, my eyes stung, but I held back, not wanting to cry in front of her. Emily listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or placing a hand on my arm in comfort. When I stopped, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "Ben, you're an incredible son. Not everyone would do what you're doing. Stay, fight even when everything's against you." I shook my head, my voice bitter. "You don't understand, Emily. I'm not incredible. I just don't know what else to do. If I give up, I'll lose him. And if I lose him, I don't know how I'll live." She looked at me, her eyes sparking with determination. "Ben, you're not as alone as you think. Let me help you, okay? I want to write a story about you, about your fight for your father. It could get people's attention, maybe help you a little." I hesitated. "Write about me?" "I don't want to be a pity case, Emily." "It's not about pity," she said firmly. "It's a story of devotion, of resilience. People need to know there are still people like you willing to sacrifice everything for family. Let me try." I looked into her eyes, and for the first time in months I felt a faint spark of hope. "Okay," I said, "but don't exaggerate anything. Just tell the truth." Emily smiled, this time a genuine smile. "The truth is powerful enough, Ben." A few days later, Emily's article appeared in the People of Kansas section of the Wichita Tribune. The headline was simple but heartfelt: "The Son Who Never Gives Up." The piece recounted my story and my father's, from the fateful night of the accident, through the exhausting months, to my unwavering resolve to stay by his side. Emily wrote with sincerity and precision, without embellishment, but each sentence struck like a hammer to the reader's heart. She portrayed me not as a hero, but as an ordinary person grappling with loss and pain anyone could relate to. The article spread quickly. It was shared on social media, circulated in local community groups, and even picked up by other newspapers. I never expected my story to touch so many people. Strangers began sending letters to the hospital, accompanied by handwritten notes of encouragement. An elderly woman sent a card with $20 tucked inside and a note: "You remind me of my son. Keep going. Don't give up." A group of high school students in Hutchinson organized a fundraiser at their school, sending me an envelope with $300 and a message: "We want to help Mr. Walter." I read those letters, my hands trembling, tears streaming down my cheeks. It wasn't about the money, though it helped cover some hospital bills, but because for the first time in months I felt I wasn't alone. Kindness, which I thought had vanished from the world, still existed, flickering in the small acts of strangers. One afternoon I sat by my father, reading him a letter from a woman in Wichita who said our story inspired her to call her own father after years of estrangement. "Can you hear this, Dad?" I whispered, gripping his hand. "People are praying for you. They believe you'll pull through." "So do I." I didn't know if he could hear me, but I wanted to believe he felt it. For the first time in months, I saw a faint light at the end of the tunnel. Not because of money, but because the kindness of strangers gave me the strength to keep going. I returned to the hospital hallway where Emily was waiting. She'd come to check on the article's impact. When she saw me, she smiled. "See, Ben? I told you. Your story touched so many people." I nodded, my voice hoarse. "Thank you, Emily. I don't know what to say. You've given me a reason to believe things can get better." She placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes warm. "You don't need to thank me. You've done everything for your father. I just helped your story reach others." That night I sat by my father, watching his face under the dim ICU lights. I had no money, no job, but I had something new. Hope. And that hope, fragile as it was enough to keep me fighting. A year had passed since that fateful night when the phone rang at 10:47 p.m., pulling me into a storm of loss and grief. A year long as a lifetime, filled with days I thought I couldn't survive. But I did. Not through my own strength, but through the kindness of strangers. Emily's article in the Wichita Tribune spread my and my father's story, touching the hearts of hundreds, thousands across Kansas. Envelopes of money, letters of encouragement, and small donations from the community kept my father's treatment going, keeping him with me through the darkest days. I had no savings left, no job, no Clara, but I had my father, and that was all that mattered. My life had become simple, almost austere. By day, I took odd jobs at Hutchinson Hospital, cleaning hallways, assisting nurses with small tasks, anything to earn a few dollars to pay down the bank debt. By night, I sat by my father in the ICU, holding his hand, reading letters from strangers or recounting childhood memories from the farm. I didn't know if he could hear me, but I wanted to believe he felt it. The machines beeped steadily, the cold white neon lights illuminated his pale face, but I never lost hope. Never. One early autumn morning, as a cool breeze swept through Hutchinson, I entered my father's room as usual. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, casting faint golden streaks across the floor. I held a warm cloth, gently wiping his face, a ritual that had become sacred to me. "It's nice out today, Dad," I said, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "If you wake up, I'll take you back to the farm. The wheat fields must be golden by now." I paused, my hand resting on his forehead, when suddenly I saw his finger twitch. It was a slight movement, almost imperceptible, but it stopped my heart. I stared at his hand, afraid I'd imagined it. "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling. Then it happened again. His index finger twitched, as if reaching for me. I shot up, nearly dropping the cloth. "Nurse! Doctor!" I shouted, rushing into the hallway. My heart pounded, my mind swirling with a mix of hope and fear. A nurse hurried over, followed by Dr. Carter. I pointed at my father, my voice breaking. "He moved!" His finger moved. Dr. Carter immediately checked him, his eyes focused but unable to hide his surprise. He called for a neurologist, and the room quickly filled with urgency. I stood in the corner, hands clenched, barely daring to breathe. The doctors checked the machines, tested reflexes, and murmured medical terms I didn't understand. Finally, Dr. Carter turned to me, his eyes glinting with a rare spark of hope. "Benjamin, your father is showing neurological responses. This is the first positive sign in a year. We'll monitor him closely, but this is a big step forward." I don't remember what I said. Maybe I just nodded, tears streaming down my cheeks. I looked back at my father, still motionless on the bed, but this time he felt closer than ever. I took his hand, whispering, "You did it, Dad. I knew you could." The weeks that followed were an emotional journey. My father showed more small responses. A blink, a weak squeeze of the hand, and then, one morning, he opened his eyes. I was sitting by him, reading a letter from a Hutchinson student, when his eyes slowly opened, locking onto mine. I froze, the letter slipping from my hand to the floor. "Dad?" I whispered, hardly believing my eyes. He couldn't speak right away, but his eyes, deep, warm, full of life, told me he was back. I burst into tears, hugging him, heedless of the wires and machines around us. Nurses rushed in, Dr. Carter appeared, and the room filled with indescribable joy. "Welcome back, Mr. Harris," Dr. Carter said, his voice trembling too. After weeks of rehabilitation, my father began to speak. His voice was weak, raspy, but every word was a miracle. One evening, as I sat by him, he took my hand, his eyes shining with a gratitude I'd never seen. "Ben," he said, his voice faint, "you didn't abandon me. Thank you." I bowed my head, tears falling again. "I couldn't abandon you, Dad. I never would." He smiled, a weak but meaningful smile. Then he began to share, word by word, secrets he'd kept for years. "Ben," he said, "the farm isn't all I have. There's something I never told you." I frowned, unsure where he was going. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, as if summoning his remaining strength. "Before I retired, I was a founding shareholder of Langford Foods Corporation. Not under my name, but as a silent partner. I invested in that company from its earliest days, when it was just a small idea. I kept it secret because I didn't want you caught in conflicts of interest, because I wanted you to forge your own path. But after the accident, I realized it's time you knew the truth." I sat stunned, as if struck by lightning. "Langford Foods?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Clara's family's company? You're a founding shareholder?" He nodded, his eyes calm but resolute. "I own a significant share, Ben. But I let Charles and Evelyn run it because I trusted they'd do well. I didn't want to interfere, didn't want you caught between me and your wife's family. But now, I think it's time we take back what's ours." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father, the man who lived simply on the farm, who taught me that value lies in honest work, was a founding shareholder of Langford Foods, the company run by Clara's family, the company that fired me without mercy. I was both moved and overwhelmed, as if the world had turned upside down before my eyes. "Dad," I said, my voice choking, "why didn't you tell me sooner? If I'd known, things might have been different." He shook his head. "No, Ben. You did the right thing. You stayed for me, not for money or power. That's what makes me proudest." I leaned down, pressing my forehead to his hand, tears falling onto the white bedsheet. "I don't know what to do next," I admitted, "but I promise I won't let you down." He patted my head, his voice firmer than ever. "You won't fail, Ben. We'll face this together." That night I sat by my father, my mind reeling with what he'd revealed. Langford Foods, the company that fired me, that saw me as weak, had been built on a foundation my father helped create. A new fire ignited within me, not of anger, but of resolve. My father had woken up, a miracle I hadn't dared dream of. But more than that, he'd given me a weapon, the truth, and I knew the real battle was just beginning. In the days following my father's awakening, we barely rested. Though still weak, he guided me to retrieve old files hidden in a secret compartment of the safe at the farm, documents he had kept concealed for over 20 years. Inside were shareholder agreements, meeting minutes, and letters from the early days of Langford Foods Corporation's founding. Each piece of paper was a fragment revealing the truth. My father, Walter Harris, was not just a humble farmer, but one of the cornerstones of the very corporation Clara's family now ran. My hands trembled as I read each page. Amid the faded ink, I felt two things: shock at discovering my father's role in that world of power, and pain at realizing he had chosen to step back, silently enduring it all, just to shield me from the vortex of ambition. We hired a lawyer, Linda Thompson, a sharp-witted, middle-aged woman whose keen eyes missed no detail. She reviewed every document, confirming that my father's founding shareholder rights were still legally binding. "Mr. Walter," she said with certainty, "the Langford family deliberately concealed your role. They profited from your shares without acknowledgement. We have enough evidence to turn the tables." My father nodded, his eyes calm yet burning with a fire I'd never seen. "I don't want power, Linda," he said. "I want justice. For me, and for my son. I looked at him, my heart swelling with pride and resolve. For the past year, I had fought to keep him alive despite every loss. Now that he was back, we would face those who had dismissed me as a failure together. We decided to attend the annual shareholders' meeting of Langford Foods, where the Langford family and major stakeholders would gather. It would be our stage, where the truth would be unveiled. The meeting took place at Langford Foods headquarters in Wichita, a gleaming glass building dazzling from lobby to ceiling. I wore an old suit, the only piece of clothing left after selling nearly everything I owned. My father, however, looked dignified in a suit he reserved for special occasions, the one he'd kept from his days as a mechanical engineer, attending critical signings and conferences. Though his health was still frail, he walked slowly but steadily. The cane in his hand didn't make him seem old or weak, but rather accentuated the calm, resolute demeanor of a man who had spent half his life in factories and now stood on a battlefield of honor. We entered the grand lobby, my heart pounding, but my father's gaze was as serene as a lake after a storm. As we stepped into the meeting room, the air froze. Over 30 shareholders, board members, and senior executives turned to stare at us. Charles Langford sat at the head of the table, his expensive suit emphasizing his commanding presence. Evelyn sat beside him, her face perfectly made up, her polite smile cold. Clara was there too, seated near her mother, her eyes flashing with panic when she saw me and my father. A pang of pain shot through my chest at the sight of her, but I quickly pushed it aside. Today was not the time for weakness. "Mr. Harris," Charles spoke, his voice a mix of surprise and irritation. "I wasn't aware you were invited to this meeting. And Benjamin, you're no longer an employee of this company. What are you two doing here?" My father smiled, a slow but sharp smile. "Charles, I don't need an invitation to attend a meeting for a company I helped build." The room held its breath. A few shareholders whispered to each other, their curious eyes fixed on my father. Charles frowned, his voice hardening. "What are you talking about, Walter? You're just a retired farmer. You have no place in this room." Linda, standing beside us, stepped forward, holding a thick stack of documents. "Mr. Langford," she said, her voice calm but authoritative, "Walter Harris is not just a farmer. He is a founding shareholder of Langford Foods Corporation, holding a 25% stake documented in legal records from 1985. We have ample evidence to prove this." She placed the documents on the table, each page meticulously arranged like a bomb waiting to detonate. Charles shot to his feet, his face flushed. "This is a joke. Those documents can't possibly be legally binding. They expired long ago." Linda smiled, unfazed. "Mr. Langford, I've reviewed them thoroughly. These documents are fully valid. Mr. Walter never transferred his shares, and his founding shareholder rights are protected under Kansas law. Furthermore, we have evidence that the current leadership deliberately concealed Mr. Walter's role to profit from his stake." The room erupted in murmurs. Shareholders exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others whispering in indignation. Evelyn tried to maintain her composure, but I saw her hand tighten around her pen, her knuckles white. Clara kept her head down, unable to meet my or my father's eyes. My father raised a hand, signaling for silence. Though he stood with difficulty, his presence commanded the room's attention. "I'm not here to seize power," he said, his voice deep and clear, resonating through the space. 20 years ago, I chose not to interfere because I wanted this company to grow, because I trusted Charles and Evelyn. But I was wrong. You exploited my shares, disregarded my value, and worst of all, you turned your backs on my son when he needed you most." He paused, looking directly at Charles. "Today, I'm declaring my intent to reclaim my founding shareholder rights, and I demand an independent audit of Langford Foods' financial operations for the past 20 years. The room exploded. An elderly shareholder stood, his voice trembling with anger. "If this is true, the board has deceived us. I demand an explanation." Charles slammed his hand on the table, his face purple. "This is a conspiracy. Walter, you can't just show up with a few old papers and demand control of my company." "I'll sue you," Linda responded, her voice icy. Mr. Langford, you're welcome to sue, but I advise you to read these documents carefully first. The courts will side with us. I stood, unable to stay silent any longer. I looked directly at Charles, Evelyn, and Clara, my voice trembling but resolute. I worked for Langford Foods for 5 years, giving my all. But when my father was in an accident, you turned your backs on me. You fired me, called me emotional, weak. Today I want you to know, I'm not here to beg. I'm here to demand justice, for my father and for what your family deliberately hid. Clara looked up, her eyes filled with pain and confusion. Ben, she whispered, but I shook my head. I didn't want her explanations, not now. The shareholders began asking questions, their voices growing sharper. A middle-aged woman, a major shareholder, stood. If what Mr. Harris says is true, the board must be held accountable. I propose suspending Mr. Charles's role immediately until the audit is complete. Applause broke out from a few, while Charles nearly shouted, "You can't do this! This is my company!" But his voice was drowned out by a wave of opposition. Linda turned to my father, whispering, "We did it, Mr. Harris. They can't deny it anymore." As the meeting ended in chaos, the media had begun gathering outside the building, likely tipped off by an employee or shareholder. Cameras flashed, reporters called our names, but we didn't stop. I supported my father as we left the meeting room, our eyes meeting for a moment. His gaze was calm, but I knew he was proud. So was I. As I supported my father out of Langford Foods headquarters, the Wichita sunlight shone brightly, but the air around us remained heavy with curious stares and the clicking of reporters' cameras. News of my father's appearance, a founding shareholder hidden for over 20 years, had leaked with astonishing speed. Within hours of the shareholders' meeting, the first articles appeared on social media, with sensational headlines like "Shareholder Scandal at Langford Foods," "Powerful Family Conceals the Truth," and "The Farmer Turned Secret Shareholder Turns the Tables." I didn't read them, but I could feel the heat of the media storm approaching. In the days that followed, the story spread like a wildfire. The Wichita Tribune, the paper that had published Emily's article about me and my father, led with a series of investigative pieces on the shareholder scandal. They interviewed former shareholders, dug into the founding history of Langford Foods, and exposed how the Langford family, particularly Charles and Evelyn, had deliberately erased my father's name from public records to consolidate their power. Each article was a blow to the Langford's reputation, once seen as Kansas's model family. I didn't feel triumphant, but I couldn't deny a sense of justice taking shape. Langford Foods stock began to plummet. Within 3 days, the share price dropped over 30%, sparking panic among investors. Major partners, from supermarket chains to raw material suppliers, halted cooperation, awaiting the results of the independent audit my father had demanded. The Kansas State Financial Commission swiftly intervened, ordering the suspension of Charles Langford's executive role pending investigation. The news hit Wichita like a bomb, and I could imagine Charles's purple-faced rage upon receiving the notice. Evelyn, always proud of her impeccable image, couldn't escape the storm either. Under pressure from the public and shareholders, she was forced to resign as head of public relations, a severe blow to her pride. Clara, my wife, wasn't spared the wave of criticism. Social media posts branded her the princess of a fraudulent family, a cruel nickname I knew she never expected. I didn't relish her pain, but I couldn't ignore the consequences of her family's actions. My father and I stayed silent with the media. We declined all interview requests, leaving everything to our lawyer, Linda. She worked tirelessly, providing evidence to the Financial Commission and coordinating with other shareholders to ensure a transparent audit. Meanwhile, my father was officially reinstated as a founding shareholder. At an emergency board meeting, he was elected as a key voting member, a position he should have held 20 years ago. I watched him, now healthier, sitting in the meeting room with a calm but sharp gaze, and I knew he wasn't doing this for power. He was doing it for justice, for me, and for the values he'd instilled in me since childhood. Amid the storm, Clara tried to reach me. She texted, called, but I didn't respond. I wasn't angry, but I no longer had the strength to face her justifications. Finally, one afternoon, as I sat with my father in the hospital, she appeared. I heard the familiar clack of her heels in the hallway, and when I looked up, there she was. Her face pale, her usually sharp green eyes now filled with anxiety. "Ben," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk outside for a moment?" I glanced at my father dozing in his hospital bed, and he gave a slight nod. I followed her out. "I didn't expect things to go this far," she began, her voice low and hesitant. "Ben, I didn't know your father was a founding shareholder. I didn't know my parents did those things. I was just trying to protect my family like you protected your dad." I looked at her, feeling as if I were seeing a stranger. "Clara," I said, my voice calmer but colder than I intended. "I begged you to stand by me just once. But you chose your family even when they were wrong. I don't blame you, but I can't pretend things are the same." She bowed her head, her hands clutching her purse tightly. "Ben, I'm sorry. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us." Her words stung not with love, but with memories of what we once had. I remembered our early days, her radiant smile at our wedding, our dreams of a shared future. But that future was shattered now, and I didn't know if it could be mended. "Clara," I said, my voice softer, "I don't hate you. But I'm not the man you knew anymore. I've changed, and maybe you have too." She looked up, her eyes shimmering with tears. "So, is this the end?" I didn't answer, but I think she understood. She nodded, her lips pressed tight to hold back tears. "I understand," she whispered, then turned away. The sound of her heels echoed, fading down the hallway, leaving me in heavy silence. I didn't feel victorious, only an emptiness I wasn't sure I could fill. I returned to my father's room and sat beside him. He was awake, his eyes watching me with understanding. "You okay, Ben?" he asked, his voice still weak but warm. "I'm okay, Dad," I said, taking his hand. "It's just, everything's changing so fast." He smiled, the gentle smile I'd longed for over the past year. "Sometimes change is the only way we find the right path, Ben." My father and I remained silent, working only with Linda to provide evidence as the Financial Commission requested. As a founding shareholder, my father began attending new board meetings, proposing changes to steer the company back on track. I watched him, a man who once lived quietly on a farm, stand up with resolve and wisdom, and I couldn't help but feel proud. One afternoon, as we sat in his hospital room, golden sunlight streaming through the window, he took my hand. "Ben," he said, "you gave me a second chance. Now it's my turn to help you rebuild your life." I smiled, feeling a lightness for the first time in months. The Langford family had crumbled, but my father and I stood strong, and that was our greatest victory. As the media storm subsided, as the flashing cameras and whispers of public opinion faded, my father and I returned to a simple life where it all began, the farm on the outskirts of Hutchinson. That land, once a symbol of loss when I had to mortgage it to save my father, now became a place of renewal. After my father reclaimed his founding shareholder rights in Langford Foods, the bank agreed to restructure the loan, allowing me to redeem the farm. It wasn't just a piece of land, it was my father's soul, my mother's memory, and the place where I rediscovered myself. We moved back to the farm on an early winter morning when the air was crisp and the wheat fields were turning golden. My father, though still needing time for full recovery, was much stronger. I fixed up the old house, repainting the faded walls, replacing the rusted tin roof, and planting a small vegetable garden in the back, just as my mother used to do. Each swing of the hoe, each drop of sweat that fell to the earth was a reminder. I had made it through, and my father was still here by my side. One afternoon, as golden sunlight stretched across the fields, my father and I sat on the old wooden bench in front of the porch. He held a cup of coffee, steam rising in the cold air. I sat beside him, my hands still smeared with dirt from a day's work. The field before us sprawled wide, shimmering under the sunset as if telling its own story. a story of loss and rebirth. "Ben," my father said, his voice deep and steady, the way it was when he wanted to convey something important. "You held on to the most precious things. Faith and honor. Not everyone could do what you did. I'm proud of you." I looked at him, my heart warmed but tinged with a faint ache as I recalled all we had endured. "I just did what I had to, Dad," I said, offering a small smile. "I couldn't lose you. Never." He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip still weak but full of strength. "You didn't just save me, Ben. You saved yourself. You showed me that even when the world turns its back, there are still people who choose to stand for what's right." I didn't reply, only gazed out at the field where the sunlight was fading. His words were an affirmation of my journey, a long, painful year, but one filled with meaning.